Is it that makes some people succeed while others fail miserably despite very similar conditions and capability? And I think after 25 years, after personally interviewing more than 20,000 people in my career as an executive search consultant, I think I have an answer. If you look at our lives are very simple. We are basically born, and then we spend whatever 25 years studying full-time, and then we continue working the rest of our life. The first factor for career success is closely related to luck, which is genetics. If you are healthy, if you are smart, you have an advantage in life. But we know that genes are less than half of what we are, and more than half of what we are is what we actually do with our genes. That's why I'm convinced that the second factor for career success is development, which is my shorthand for all the learning, formal or informal, that we achieve through life. Once we become professionals and start working full-time, a third factor comes into play, which is the ability to make great career decisions. We know it. There are some organizations which are outstanding for building our skills. If you look at the profile of the Fortune 500 CEOs, you'll find that the first large individual group is Harvard MBAs. The second large individual group is GE alumni, GE graduates, people who went to GE, and because it's such a machine for building talent, went on to become leaders of other companies. But then, once we become managers and start doing things through others, the fourth, final, and most important factor comes into play, which is the ability to make great people decisions. Nothing is more important for our career success than making great people decisions. It's especially important once we become managers, because everything we do will depend on the people we've chosen. Our results, our performance, our risks, our chances of being promoted because of the success of what we've developed, in short, our career success. Why great people decisions matter so much? Because they are the key for our career success. This experiment and several others is brilliantly described in a wonderful book, Emotional Intelligence, by Daniel Goleman, frequent speaker with HSM. When I saw this book that was in the cover of Time magazine as the book that redefined what it means to be smart, I contacted Dan, and for the following 7 years, we did lots of research together at his Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence. He became curious about whether this would apply to different cultures, and I became curious about whether this could apply for executive search. And so I did the following. I classified the people I had hired into successes and failures. I looked at 3 broad characteristics and tried to see whether there was any difference in the profiles. Those were people we have hired with a very relevant previous experience, people who had very strong emotional intelligence, masters at managing themselves and their relation with others. And finally, highly clever people in the traditional sense of IQ, verbal, analytical, mathematical type of intelligence. I did the analysis at that point in time for Latin America, which is a place where, as I like to put it, Latin America is a place where even the past is unpredictable. Yeah. So I shared this with Dan, and I said, well, let's look for a place where even the future is predictable. We went to Germany. And then they say, let's go to some place which is completely different from anything else. We went to Japan. Look at the profiles. For the 3 so different cultures, if you look at the first set of bars, exactly 70% of the successful people we've hired had a very previous relevant experience. So experience counts for a senior leadership position. But even more important than experience was emotional intelligence. 80% of the most successful people were masters at managing themselves and their relation. And the least important factor, relatively speaking, was IQ. Which doesn't mean that these people were stupid. I mean, they would not go like this when eating an ice cream, no? They were finalist candidates presented by the finest executive search firm in the world, Egon Zehnder International. They were clever people with a wonderful experience who were masters at managing themselves and their relationship. But look at the failures. If you look at the difference between the 2 groups, by far, if you have to choose one aspect to look at that would be the best predictor of success or failures, that's obviously emotional intelligence. 80% of the successes had high emotional intelligence, and only 25% of the failures. And the failures, despite having more experience on average, and despite being more clever, failed because of their emotional stupidity. So, first question on how to master great people decisions, what to look for in a candidate. remember to check for the soft. Because you hire people on experience and academic background, and you hire them because of the way in which they manage themselves and their relations. And I would totally agree with the two criteria that Pat mentioned, hunger and humility.